Everton's fans might be taking a sigh of relief as of last week with the investment signalled from 777 Partners. Farhad Moshiri, the club's owner, has been looking for fresh investment for quite some time now, and with a failed attempt from MSP Partners, it looks as though 777 Partners is the only option and the right option in Farhad Moshiri's eyes. So surely the agreement with 777 Partners is exactly what the Everton fans want. New owners, new ideas, new money and new management. So are Everton's financial struggles that have been over the past few years now over? And what exactly are 777 Partners acquiring? My name's Neil Wood and I'm a football finance professional. On this channel, Football Finance Professionals, we use football to educate you about finance topics. If that sounds of interest to you, why don't you subscribe to the channel? If you like the video, hit like and share it with your friends. If you've got any comments about Everton's recent announcement with fresh investment from 777 Partners, why don't you leave them in the comments below? And in this video, we'll be looking at Everton's finances over the past few years and why they need fresh investment. So make sure you stick around to the end. So why is it that Everton, one of English football's founding members and a Premier League founding member, are in so much trouble financially? Founded in 1878, 145 years ago, Everton Football Club is one of English football's founding members. The club has only been out of the English top flight 4 times since the league was founded back in 1888. And since 1954, the club has been sitting at the top of the tree in either the Premier League or the first division of English football when the Premier League didn't exist. Top flight English football since 1954. Everton is yet to be relegated from the Premier League but has come close twice over the previous 2 seasons. The club has been successful in securing several league titles, FA Cup titles and even a European Cup Winners' Cup, alongside multiple European appearances. In the Premier League era, Everton's best finish was 4th in 2004-05, and that included Champions League qualification the year after. Since the formation of the Premier League in 1992, Everton has won the FA Cup title in 1994-95 and has won the Charity Shield once. Out of 30 seasons being present in the Premier League, it's finished in the top half of the league 15 times. But in the last 2 seasons, relegation to the Championship has been a realistic outcome for the club. And that would have left the club in even more financial distress, losing the very lucrative Premier League broadcasting deal. But why is it that Everton were already in so much trouble financially? Football clubs, and in particular Premier League clubs, are seen to be cash rich, with wealthy owners, a large broadcasting deal in comparison to European neighbours, huge sponsorship deals, and access to unlimited amounts of cash in some instances. But it's often the reliance on a limited number of individuals, customers, or even the broadcasting deal puts clubs under certain amounts of pressure when it comes to managing liquidity. And like any other industry, or even more so in football, liquidity management is key. But what is liquidity management? It's managing your cash inflows against your cash outflows, really focusing on the word cash. Accounting is separate to cash management. And for football clubs, it's relying on those inflows from those traditional revenue streams along with player trading sales, whilst also trying to control costs, primarily football player wages, amortization, which is the accounting behind the cash outflows for player trading acquisitions, and any other large expenditure. In Everton's case, they had one big one which we'll discuss in a second. In the case of Everton, to see where liquidity is coming from, you need to look in the cash flow statements of the financial statements. And in the final season before COVID-19 hit back in 18-19, the club finished 8th with net cash inflows of £18 million. That means the cash balance went up year on year by 18 million. Quite an achievement. But if you look at the cash flow statement, you can see that it was primarily driven by 3 factors. Number 1, shareholder funding. Cash that was provided primarily by Farhad Moshiri through loan funding. Number 2, player sales or cash receipts from player sales. And number 3, more new loans. So 2 out of the 3 cash inflow sources came in the form of financing from shareholders and externally. And those large cash inflows were offset in part by trading cash outflows. That means the underlying business, if you remove financing and things like player trading, wasn't performing when it came to cash management. There was a net cash outflow. In addition to that, player acquisitions were being financed by those three cash inflows alongside the repayment of existing loans. With high operating costs and amortisation, in 2019 the club made a loss before tax of £111 million. And it's a similar story in 2020, and at the back end of 2020 that's when COVID-19 hit. Again we saw an increase in the cash balance, which looks healthy, but primarily driven by similar factors. But with an underlying loss of £140 million, things were getting worse when it comes to the underlying business of Everton Football Club. The losses and continued player acquisitions were funded by player sales, loans and shareholder funding. In 2020 there was also an increase in creditors of £57 million, which contributes to the overall cash position. By not paying creditors, the overall creditor balance increases, meaning you don't need to fund that balance. But 2020 was an odd year. COVID hit at the end of the season, before the financial year finished and before the season had finished. And the season actually finished in the next financial year, ending 2021. So the financial results in 2020 alone aren't really representative. So we look at them as 1 year, on average, and that's the way that the authorities look at them as well. 2020 and 2021 are combined because of significant timing differences which we wouldn't normally see that spanned over a year end. If you look at this from an accounting perspective, you'd see broadcasting income jump in 2021. That happened across most clubs because the 2020 season finished in the year ended 2021. And that had the impact of the 2020 broadcasting income being lower than that of 2021. And that's why it's difficult to try to assess individual seasons. At the end of 2021, we see an increase once again in that cash balance, with £200 million coming from shareholder funding, loans, and once again, player sales. But the tide starts to turn in 2022, and these are the most recent financial statements that we have. As I'm sure you're aware, limited companies need to file accounts 9 months after their year end, and that's with Companies House. It's slightly earlier with the Premier League, but we won't have access to that information. So the 2023 accounts aren't yet due and won't be due for quite some time. But we can see a decrease at the end of 2022 despite increased funding from shareholders and loans to the tune of £280 million. So why did Everton's financial decline happen? Well, we can look at 4 main cash generating streams of income from Everton's perspective. The first one is as a result of COVID. Matchday income in 2021 took a hit to the tune of £15 million. No news there. That's the same across the whole league, depending on the size of your stadium and the amount of income that you could generate from a matchday. There was a significant loss to practically zero for most clubs because games were being played behind closed doors for pretty much the whole season of 2021. That lost revenue has a direct impact on the cash that's being collected. Another issue was USM and other Russian-related sponsorship deals. There was £6 million of sponsorship income every year in the commercial revenue line that was related to USM Finch Farm, the company that sponsored Everton's training facility. And USM is owned by Alisher Usmanov, a business partner of Farhad Moshiri, who has clear links with Vladimir Putin, and therefore that £6 million of income ceased to exist. In addition, USM, which is owned by Usmanov, paid a £30 million option for the naming rights of Bramley-Moore Dock, Everton's new stadium, which is still under construction. The future stadium naming rights deal was then frozen, a void which is yet to be filled by Everton. And it does seem quite unusual that someone would pay £30 million for an option to name a stadium which is yet to be built. But given the links between Usmanov and Moshiri, you can understand why this has happened. The third item is broadcasting revenue, which has been on the decline since 2019 to 2022 from 132 million down to 115 million. And that's due to the poor performance on the pitch, resulting in Everton's decline down the Premier League. The fourth and final item is cash generated from player trading. And over the past 4 seasons, Everton has been able to generate net incoming commitments. That's a net sales position when it comes to the overall value of players traded in the market. That doesn't necessarily mean that the cash has been collected, but they have sold more than they have bought when it comes to value. An unusual model, but that has probably led to some struggles on the pitch. Either that, or the money that's been invested so far by Moshiri, which is almost 750 million, hasn't been spent very well, and the club has been forced to sell its talent to try to reinvest. What are your thoughts on Everton's recruitment policy? Has the Moshiri money been spent wisely or not? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. In its financial statements, Everton Football Club claims that the player registrations have been devalued as a result of the COVID market, so they wouldn't have generated as much cash as they would have done if COVID hadn't hit. But that's not necessarily an issue until you come to sell a player and crystallise or realise the losses or a gain on sale. But the same could be said of the whole market, that it was depressed as a result of people not necessarily investing as much as they would have done if COVID hadn't have hit, with that uncertainty of where cash flows were going to come from, particularly around broadcasting income and match day income. But in the case of Everton, they could argue that if COVID hadn't hit, sales would have been more buoyant and they would have generated more cash from those sales. There are two other main sources of cash when it comes to Everton: shareholder funding and external loans. Recently, Moshiri has been struggling to put the money required to build the stadium and fund the ongoing operations of the club, particularly when it comes to increasing the investment in the squad, because primarily all of his assets will be linked back into Russia and will have been frozen due to the Russian-Ukraine war. To be fair to Moshiri, he has tried to raise funding through MSP Holdings. However, the current lender, Rights and Media Funding, has a negative pledge over the assets of Everton Football Club. Now, what does that mean? A negative pledge prevents other security being placed over assets that are already secured by a lender. And that means that Rights and Media Funding can effectively refuse the right for another lender to take part of their security, meaning it would be diluted. To be honest, any football club is high risk from a lending perspective due to the football creditor rule, which states that football creditors, being other football clubs, the league, players and management, would get paid out before any secured lender whatsoever. That's there to protect the overall football ecosystem, to protect other football clubs from one football club going into administration or liquidation. It's designed so that any remaining funds within a struggling club would be redistributed into the football ecosystem rather than leaving it into the lender's hands. And that includes HMRC, who are obviously going to be a creditor of all football clubs when it comes to collecting PAYE and national insurance. So without any security to be offered from Everton to MSP, Everton was too high a risk for MSP Holdings, leaving only one party around the table, and that was 777 partners who were willing to invest in the club. But now it looks like that's going to be a full takeover as opposed to any external financing in the form of a loan. So in summary, 4 things have really brought the downfall of Everton when it comes to financial results. Number 1, COVID-19 impacting matchday income and the cash in relation to that significantly. Number 2, large sponsors being frozen out by the UK government, particularly USM, with its links to Russia as a result of the Ukraine war. Number 3, and linked to number 2, is Moshiri's cash running out, linking back to Usmanov and his business partner with assets being frozen in Russia. And number 4, large cash commitments in relation to Bramley Moor Dock, the new stadium which needs significant financing and ongoing financing, running over budget as most of these projects tend to do, particularly in times of crises where the cost of materials is increasing. The net result of that is that 777 partners appear to be able to acquire what appears to be a distressed football club. The details of the acquisition haven't yet been made public, and it looks as though it'll be some time until the deal is completed, probably towards the end of 2023. And it's probably fair to say, in the absence of any further information, that the club is financially distressed. Farhad Moshiri has acknowledged his inability to continually fund the activities of the club, and we're not yet to mention the disappointing start to the 23-24 season, which could be turned around. But what are 777 acquiring? Well, first of all, it's a football club where relegation is a very real threat. At which point they're able to negotiate a deal which could be a championship value club as opposed to a Premier League club. It's not set in stone that Everton are going to be relegated, but given their performance over the past 2 seasons and the fact that they're really struggling financially, and the fact that the deal won't go through until Christmas at the earliest and could potentially be delayed, that may have a significant part on the value of the club. If the club continue to struggle on the pitch and stay within the bottom 3 before the deal's signed, the value may shift down even further. On top of that, the club has some form of potential sporting sanction that could be administered by the Premier League as a result of allegedly breaking the profitability and sustainability rules or financial fair play rules in the Premier League. These rules state that clubs can lose up to £105 million over a 3-year period subject to shareholder funding. The shareholder funding, or secured funding as it's termed in the Premier League handbook, has been clear. We can't argue that Moshiri has tried and has been able to put his hand in his pocket and funded the activities of the football club. So we can assume £105 million is the threshold that's been set by the Premier League for losses that have been made over a 3-year period historically. But we have to remember that from 2019 to 2021, the authorities are stitching those 2 periods together and taking an average, so we're actually looking back over a 4-year financial period. And using those periods, Everton have made a loss of £286 million. That's over 3 periods or 4 years. And looking into Everton's financial statements, they claim that £90 million has been attributed to COVID. So that should be able to be added back from those losses, taking losses down to approximately £200 million. This would mean that a further £95 million would need to be justified in the form of other adjustments to the bottom line to get to that adjusted earnings before tax, which is part of the profitability and sustainability calculation for Everton Football Club. This could come from potential lost revenues which aren't in the financial statements, if there are any, uncrystallised losses from football player acquisitions, and the usual adjustments when it comes to profitability and sustainability, which include women's, community and youth investment. So whether due to on-pitch performance being poor, or a potential threat of a points deduction or other sanction from the Premier League, or potentially a combination of both, relegation is a real threat to Everton, and that will do nothing for the finances. Yes, there will be parachute payments in the Championship, and if you want to look at the effects of the Premier League relegation, why don't you check out one of our other videos? We've already reviewed this on the channel. But the future could be bright, with new owners, a new strategy, and new management being put in place. The season could be turned around for one of the league's most historical football clubs. And we think it would be a shame to see them go down. But is it just a matter of time unless we can get that fresh investment with that fresh strategy on the ground, running as soon as the acquisition has happened? After all, there are 33 games to play before the end of the season, but the clock is ticking and it will take some time for this deal to get through. But what are your thoughts on the financial situation at Everton Football Club? Are 777 partners the best option for the club? Are there any realistic alternatives given the struggles that Moshiri is now faced and he has tried and failed with other partners? And do you think that the new owners will alleviate the threat, which is very real, of relegation and potentially administration that hangs over the club? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. My name's Neil Wood and I'm a football finance professional. If you want to see more videos around the topic of football finance, or if you simply want to learn about finance topics using football as a medium, why not hit subscribe, like the video, leave any comments below and share this video with your friends. Thanks for watching.